Greetings, Vitayimo, everyone. It's good to see you. It's good to see familiar faces, new faces. Welcome to Fulbright Ukraine. Today we have a very exciting discussion ahead of us by a fantastic Fulbright alumna of ours and a wonderful, wonderful thinker about all kinds of relationships between the contemporary and history and people and anthropological discussions today. Also will be enriched by Professor Catherine Wanner, who is with us from Penn State University. And before I introduce both of our speakers in a little more detail, I wanted to remind everybody here that our deadlines are still open for our student program, as well as our researcher program and our scholars program, which is not until the fall, I believe October deadline. So if you're considering applying, please do so. We also have regular workshops and Q&A sessions to help you in your preparations. So stay tuned for the dates on those. And our talk today will be recorded and posted, so don't forget to share it with your friends, colleagues, and others on social media. We keep a record of all of our discussions on our YouTube page, as well as our Facebook, but it's more organized on our YouTube, so I recommend going there. You can also check out some of the discussions we've had in the last 2 years relevant to topics related to the war. And if you have ideas for future talks or presentations that you would like to do, write to us. We're very open and eager to support you and to foster a critical discussion about the war and beyond. So please reach out to us. About Fulbright more generally, those of you who may be new here and haven't heard about Fulbright before, this program is a worldwide program in over 180 countries that began in 1946, right after the World War II situation, and was started by Senator William Fulbright. And it is designed to bring academics, scholars, museum practitioners, independent artists, etc., from countries around the world to the United States for research and study, and Americans who go abroad and learn and teach in other countries. So it's very important to uphold this legacy of discussion and dialogue, and that's why we're very excited today to hear about 2 countries, Poland and Ukraine, and also to hear live from our own alumni of this program. I will begin first by introducing Julia Buyskykh. She is an anthropologist, and she has published a fantastic book entitled To the West from the Bug River, Diaries from the Borderlands, which is the topic of our discussion today. She notes that this book can be described as anthropological reportage deriving from her ethnographic field notes and travel diaries written during her research in Poland between 2015 and 2018. And I will let her give more detail about the book in the course of her presentation. She is also a historian and a co-founder of an NGO, the Center for Applied Anthropology in Kyiv. Her research interests include lived religion, Orthodoxy and Catholicism in Ukraine and Poland, interconfessional relationships, practices, pilgrimages, memories. She's working on her not first, but second PhD thesis in anthropology and study of religions at University College Cork in Ireland. And she has been a postdoc at Institute of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology at the University of Warsaw, and several research stays in different Polish academic institutions going back to 2014. And she has been a research fellow in the framework of the Prisma Ukraina Research Network Eastern Europe, which is based in Berlin. And most importantly, a Fulbright scholar to Pennsylvania State University. And that is, I'm guessing, where she met Professor Catherine Wanner, who is with us today. She is professor of history, anthropology, and religious studies at Pennsylvania State University, a cultural anthropologist who does historically informed ethnographic research, exploring shifting politics of religion, processes of secularization in the USSR, and how they have shaped social and cultural practices in everyday life. She was a Fulbright US scholar to Ukraine in 2019-2020 at Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, and also a Petro-Yatsik Distinguished Fellow 2023 to 2024, so now, as well as at Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. And her most recent publications address the Russo-Ukrainian War, including a monograph, Everyday Religiosity and the Politics of Belonging in Ukraine, as well as an edited volume, Dispossession, Anthropological Perspectives on Russia's War Against Ukraine, which was published by Routledge just this year, and that is open access. So if you Google Dispossession, Routledge, and Catherine Wanner, it should come up and you can read it on your own. So I will now turn the floor to our moderator, Catherine Wanner, if you would like to open up our discussion, introduce our presentation with Julia.
Thank you very much, Jessica. It's really a pleasure to be here. Actually, Julia and I met even before she became a Fulbright scholar. I had years before that even discovered her very, very elegant and insightful writings on religion. And that was already at that point a long-standing interest of mine. And so we both had the brilliant idea to apply to the Fulbright program, I to come to Ukraine and Julia to come to the US. We were trying to connect. And of course, Fulbright is tremendously competitive. And so we were hoping somehow one of us might actually get the Fulbright. And as it turns out, we both did. And I would like to also, while I have the floor, offer my thanks to Fulbright. Fulbright is a fantastic organization. And I have to say, especially when I got the Fulbright, my daughter was also diagnosed with cancer at that time, and Fulbright was hugely accommodating and helpful. And I was still able to take part of that Fulbright, and I'm grateful for that. Of course, after that, we were able to coordinate Julia's time in the US so that we always overlapped, both being in Ukraine and then both being in the US. So Fulbright was very, very helpful and very, very professional, as always. So first, thanks to everyone who works at Fulbright, and especially Jessica and Maria, who are with us today. So I think we'll begin with Julia saying a few words about her latest book. And then afterwards, the format I think we had sort of settled on is I have a few open-ended questions that I'll pose to Julia, and we'll discuss the book a bit. And then we will open up the floor to all of our wonderful audience members. And I would encourage you then to think of questions you would like to ask of Julia. This is a brand new book, and I'm certain it's guaranteed to garner quite a bit of well-deserved attention. So let me pass the microphone, so to speak, to Julia.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Such a pleasure that you are here and that you're having this discussion. Jessica and Maria, thank you for organizing this venue. I wish we all could meet in Kiev, the place where we met before at Esplanadna Street, and discuss. We were there with Kathy presenting our edited volume 5 years ago, which is already history. And we were there before with Jessica and with Maria. So I very much hope that there will be a time, and it will come soon, that we will all be back to Kiev again and meet there and celebrate our victory. I want to say thank you for the Fulbright program, because the draft of this book was written at the Pennsylvania State University when I was a Fulbright scholar there. And it was a hard time because it was a COVID, it was a very severe lockdown back then, spring 2020. And that was a very hard time personally for me because my father died of cancer when I was there. And I couldn't go back to Ukraine because of lockdown. So the only thing that helped me was writing this book and talking to Kathy was the only person I was able to talk back to those days, because everything was locked, everything was closed, none was available. So this is the pre-history of this book and draft of this writing. But what helped me to finish this draft and to finish my program was thinking of all those people whom I met in Poland, of different identities, different belongings, different histories. And the time and shared with me their life stories. They offered me, they trusted me to hear. And I was thinking that I owe something to these people, that their stories could be heard. Some stories had no opportunity to be talked and to be heard and to be listened for decades. So this book is mostly devoted to all those people whom I met during my research in Poland and during my traveling in Poland. Let me share with you my presentation now. Yes. На захід від Бугу щоденник із пограниччя to the west of the book river, stories from Borderlands. This is the book cover, and this is my photo, which I took on the exact border of Poland and Belarus near the Buyskykh River, at the territory of Orthodox monastery in Yableczna. Why did I describe this book as anthropological reportage? Why it is so? While I was writing the articles, trying to comprehend and to process the data from Poland, I was thinking that it's always not enough space for me and to write something bigger than academic article, because those stories of all those people and local communities were a way bigger than the frame and the format of an academic article. So I was thinking that this is something that I see as a very alive flow of the river. You know, this whole book for me is a metaphor of the flow of the river, the way how people lived and live, the way how they suffered, the way how they had joy in their life, the way how they were experiencing trauma, processing it, and then finding healing from trauma from one generation to the other. So I draw my inspiration from the Anglophone tradition of reflective, intimate ethnographies. This is Alice Waterstone, My Father's Wars, for example, the ethnography written about Alice Waterstone's Polish-Jewish father. And in my book, I refer a lot to writings by Paul Rabinow, Lila Abou-Logod, Ruth Bihar, Sigrid Rausing, Kirsten Hastrup, and Catherine Wanner's last book, My Life with a Spy. I was also inspired by the tradition of reportage, as Timothy Garton-Ash and Ryszard Kapuscinski, and by family research books. One of the last books I read and which resonated with my own thoughts on Poland and its research in Poland was Matthew Zion's The Tailor of Inverness. Scottish playwright Matthew Zines was doing a genealogical research and found out that his Polish father had a lot of silence in his histories about the past. So all this writing, creative ethnography, intimate ethnography, reflective ethnography, inspired me to write the way I wrote this book. It's both academic and not. It's really like the river's flow for me. I like the way how Sigrid Rausing describes her fieldwork and the process from the fieldwork to the book. The book, Everything is Wonderful Memories of the Collective Farm in Estonia. So she writes, asking the question, what was that? That long time of note-taking, of conversations, of writing. What was it? I don't know. I was doing fieldwork, but I was also just trying to get by. It was what it was. It was interesting. And this is perhaps the core of what I wanted to say about my own research. Sometimes it was hard, but also it was so beautiful. Sometimes I didn't know what to do and what is my next step, but it was what it was. It was really interesting. It was soulful, it was intimate, and it was very multi-layered. So I would like to show you the way how the book is structured. The way how the book is structured. These are the original Ukrainian names of the chapters, and these are English. So there are 14 chapters in the book. All are connected between themselves by people's stories, and the Ukrainian intertwined history. So a chapter is a story of or local community or a person, like Season of Raspberries, or Keeper of the Past, or the Baltic Shelter of Hell, or Churches as Cemeteries, the Ukrainian wedding at the Mennonites, all of them. I wanted to tell you just briefly about 3 of them: Keys from the Church, Bialystock, Palimpsest, and Angel from the Polish Hill. So Keys from the Church is a story about the only Ukrainian family that is left in the border village, not far from Przemysl. And back then, to 2016, there was a very old Ukrainian man in his early 90s who would keep the key from the abandoned Greek Catholic Church. And all our meeting and interaction and conversations were about the abandoned church. That was Greek Catholic Church, and then it was robbed in the 1940s in the forcible resettlements of Greek Catholic and Orthodox population from the Subcarpathian area. And he was closing the church and saving something he could save in his rural house, escaping the resettlement, keeping the key from the church as something sacred, just to open the church again when the time will come. He was showing me this key from the church, and then his daughter guided me to the church in the forest on the top of the hill, and she opened the church. So, you know, and it was so heartbreaking and so beautiful. This still abandoned church amidst the forest, and this last Ukrainian family in the village that escaped resettlement and Action Vistula of 1947 and kept the keys from the church. You know, and I was wondering who would be the next person who will keep the key from the church, who would be the keeper of this shrine when this family will go as well, you know. And I just remember the most intimate moment in this my meetings with this family, when the oldest man who kept the key from the church, being blind, asked me, "Can I hold your face? Just I want to read your face." And you know, this being an ethnographer, being in the field, when you face like everything and when you experience everything, what would you do in this situation? Would you give this old man to keep your face in his hands in order for him to read your face? And I did it. It was a gesture of empathy and my respect for him, because he shared with me the most intimate thing, the key from his church, you know, and he was keeping my face in his old hands and telling me the story about his wife who died many years ago, and about his children, and about local Ukrainian community in this village that was resettled and dispersed, and he was the only Ukrainian left with his 2 children that don't speak Ukrainian anymore, and they are not even Greek Catholics, so he's the only one Greek Catholic in the village. And that was the moment, you know, of very deep connection with me and my respondents. And I have to say that many times I was thinking, when this moment comes in the field, when we are becoming friends with our respondents, and when we care about them deeply, many years after we leave the field. And I wrote many thoughts about this ethnographer's work and work too, who we are for them, what is our positionality, and what is our humanity, which is the most important, and empathy. The same questions were occupying thoughts in the chapter of Buyskyk's Palimpsest, when I was writing about the local community in the northwest of Poland, which consists of Polish repatriated from Lithuania, Belarus, and Western Ukraine in 1945-1946, and Ukrainians resettled in the frames of Operation Vistula in 1947 from southern eastern Poland, the way how they coexisted together, the way how they managed to merge into a community, the way how they claimed the alien land theirs, and also about non-existent neighbors, which are Germans and Jews, because Bialybor was former Brandenburg, which doesn't exist anymore. So very often in Bialybor, I was coming to local lakes, looking at the lake's surface and thinking, what do they cover inside? What do they have inside of them? What kind of history, untold can be told here? And I spent there a lot of time, enough time to understand that religion is very deeply intertwined with history and memory. So I was in Pittsburgh and I was lost. I was there for a conference. It was late evening. It was a huge city. I was lost there. So I was walking, and it was a very intimidating situation when I saw a big hill of trash, let's say, in the street. It was late evening in late February. And then I saw that this hill of trash, this huge amount of trash, started moving. And there was a man living in this hill of trash. So to make long story short, this man happened to be Polish, who immigrated from Poland to the United States, and his American dream has become his American nightmare, unfortunately. So he occurred to live in the streets, and he was receiving help from the Polish church nearby. That was the district of Pittsburgh called Polish Hill, where I had my hostel. And you know, the strange story ended that the homeless man from Poland in Pittsburgh helped me to get to my hostel, and we were talking in Polish late evening in the end of February 2020, and he was telling me this amazing story about his parents resettled from Belarus to post-war Poland, and that they were living in northern Pomerania, and that he always wanted to see the land of his ancestors in Belarus, and that he wants to go back to Poland, to Słupsk from America. And it was again heartbreaking. But the first story he told me was the story of resettlement happened after the Second World War, how his parents living in Belarus were forced to move to Poland because they didn't want to stay in Soviet Union, and about the home they left behind and the cow and everything. And it was so deeply close and familiar to me from my field sites in Poland, to the stories that people were telling me in Poland, That's why I decided to insert this story into the book and call Angel from the Polish Hill. But this homeless man indeed was an angel that took me into the right direction to my hostel. So why I call the book to the west from the Buyskykh River, not only because the writing for me was the metaphor of the river's flow, but also because I spent a huge amount of my research time along the Buyskykh River, which serves as the natural border between Poland and Belarus, and Poland and Ukraine. So one of my field sites was Vlodava, former shtetl, and the rural area near Vlodava. So I was walking and just researching villages in Vlodava surroundings along the Buyskykh River. And again, to the west of the Buyskykh River is my different sites in Poland, the south to Przemysl and north and west to northern western Pomerania. So I just wanted to tell the multi-layered story of all these dispersed in Poland and their connection to the border. The nature of border has been changing since 1944, 1945 till today. There are major border crises in Poland, as we know, a refugee crisis in the Polish-Belarusian border, and then the other refugee crisis in the outburst of the full-scale Russian invasion to Ukraine. So the nature of border is changing constantly. And I have to admit that this book had to be published in 2022, spring, summer 2022. And it was delayed for a year and a half because of the obvious reasons, because of the war. So when all this disaster occurred on the larger scale, I was thinking that it all doesn't make any sense, because now we are in a huge trauma and we don't know how it will be cured. So whether all these stories from different borderlands, Polish, Belarusian, Polish, but in the end, while working at the final stage with the publishing house, with publication and all these things, I was rereading book many times, editing it, and I was thinking that yes, it all makes sense, because in the end, all these stories are about healing. In the end, all these stories are about hope and about future, and all we need now is hope. So, as I said, history is a golden thread for the local communities here, here, and here. And people living here are connected with their family ties to Przemysl and Subcarpathia and Western Ukraine. People living here are connected with their family ties and histories with Northern Poland and broader. So what were my main research questions when I was doing my research? What memories of a common past have gained the most significance for constructing personal and collective narratives of resettlement after World War II, suffering and returning to the land of ancestors? How are these memories being passed on to future generations, affecting their sense of belonging? What is the role of sacred sites in those processes? Like, what if belief derives from a place where a place is animated with divine power, strength, and community memories and a sense of belonging? So what if people are so deeply tightened to the place that they would rebuild a church, reconstruct a shrine, reconstruct a pilgrimage interrupted by the Second World War, and claim this place as the place that was never losing its sanctity, that was always divine, that was always sacred? What was the evolving role of priests in communities, and especially when Greek Catholic Church was underground? What modes of interconfessional coexistence endure? Roman Catholics, Greek Catholics, Orthodox? What is the interplay between memories and imaginations of non-existent neighbors? What is home? How do people perceive home, and how many homes triangulate in people's sense of belonging? And yeah, I don't see how to take it. So I used widely here the metaphor of identity as a journey introduced by Natalia Hanenko-Friesen in her research on Ukrainian Canadians. and The Religion as a Chain of Memory by Daniel Hervieux-Leger. So what is home, and where the identity journey brings my interlocutors and my friends in the field? What are the links in the chain of memory? Perhaps were the questions that I was asking myself almost daily, being in these different fields for years. And I think that these are the most relevant questions now for all those who are dispersed all over the world, not only Ukrainians. Like, what is home? Where is our home? Whether it's something we are bearing inside of us, or it's something material that we left behind. So now I want to quote one of my respondents back to northern Western Poland. He's the third generation of Ukrainians settled from Carpathia in 1947 during Action Vistula. So he was born here, not far from German-Polish border. All the time, our parents told us that our motherland is Ukraine. They always said so, yes. So Ukraine is our de facto spiritual motherland, yes. But like Poland is too a motherland, because on the other hand, well, I live here, I was born here. Well, in fact, there are two states, but yes, that's the truth. Two homelands, yes, but all the time, that's Ukraine, which is number one. As I remember, the first time I came to Ukraine, Jesus, so I must have been in the 8th grade. It was elementary school, right? I was fascinated. It was like, oh, Jesus, we always called Ukraine the Greater Ukraine. We're also Ukrainians here, Ukrainians from Poland, but our spiritual motherland is the Greater Ukraine. So you can imagine how touched I was hearing that they call Ukraine the Greater Ukraine, Велика Україна, all the time. And how they were looking for their home inside of the huge inner journey, but also physical journey from northern Western Poland, first to the places of their ancestors, the places where they were resettled from in 1944, 1946 to Soviet Ukraine, and in 1947 in the frames of Action Vistula, here to the former German lands. And then there were long journeys to spiritual home, to Ukraine, first to Western Ukraine, then to Kiev, then further along the Dnieper River to Cherkasy, and even to southern Ukraine. Some were looking for the family members resettled in 1945, from here to Mariupol and to Donbass, for the traces of Buyskykh resettled to Donbass and Lemkos to Luhansk region. And one of the internet archives that helped me so much was an archive of coming back, issued in 2 languages, in Polish and Ukrainian. It's called Poвернення or Powroty. And it keeps a lot of information, a lot of stories of people who were resettled and who were, so to say, coming back to different places, short visits, pilgrimages, different community work, relocating and settling in mostly close to Ukrainian border, to Carpathian Mountains, where they would have the biggest sense of their home. I have to say that many of my interlocutors were telling me about their disappointment coming to Ukraine in 90s, when they were coming even to Lviv or Ivano-Frankivsk or Ternopil, and they were speaking in their Ukrainian, and their Ukrainian is the version, mostly, especially first generation version of beautiful Ukrainian language spoken in the interwar period, influenced by Polish language somehow, but still it has so many beautiful archaic forms. So when I encountered it first, I was fascinated by the melody of this language and the fact that I was reading this language in some archival documents and in old books printed for an Austro-Hungarian Empire, in Lviv. And then second and third generation is mostly 30s in their 30s now. They learned Ukrainian at schools in Poland or just at home. Their language is closer to contemporary Ukrainian language, but still different. Anyway, they all come into post-Soviet Ukraine. They were expecting people to talk Ukrainian. They were expecting to see something beautiful, something imaginary that they heard from their parents and grandparents about Ukraine. But, you know, they were disappointed by this post-Soviet reality they encountered in 90s. People speaking Russian and all these things that we were living through in 90s, be it Lviv or Kiev. Anyway, the image of spiritual motherland can be different than the reality in spiritual motherland. It could be disappointing. But since 2014, many of the communities I worked in, including Ballybor, are 100% engaged in volunteering for Ukraine, for the sake of Ukraine, coming physically to Ukraine, collecting humanitarian aid, translating for Ukrainians, and being fully involved. I remember, you know, this my own sensations in my body, this fast heartbeat, when I saw in Ballybor fully equipped ambulance blessed by the local priest and sent to Ukraine in 2015, back to the Donbas war. You know, and talking about 2022, 100% community members are engaged in helping Ukraine in many ways, at many levels. So they are helping their spiritual motherland and they are welcoming the other Ukrainians in their communities. Doesn't matter which language they speak, doesn't matter which denomination they have. It doesn't matter whether they don't believe or believe, whether they're just Orthodox or Greek Catholics or whatever, you know. The imagination has changed, you know. New times, new challenges, but also new level of empathy, I would say. This is my very fresh observation. This is the way how Ballybor looked like when I first was there in 2015. There still was the street of the Red Army. It was decommunized in 2017. Now it's Chulhovska Street. And ironically, at the street of the Red Army, there was a bench of peace, ławka pokoju, aimed to represent the idea of Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation of the hard history. And I have to say that somehow in Ballybor, it worked. For years, Poles and Ukrainians were living in the alien land, the land that belonged to Jews and Germans, and they had to build new life there, and they had to bring joy and love in this territory. And they succeed doing it. One of the examples for me, as I saw it, of this reconciliation is the tradition of singing Christmas carols, which is one year it's in Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the other year it's in Polish Roman Catholic Church. And all this complicated historical and Palimpsest, whose nature of such places as Ballybor can be seen here. This is a former German evangelical cemetery. There are only 5 German graves left. And this is the former German evangelical Lutheran chapel, which served as a shelter for Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church during 1955-1997. In front of this chapel, you can see the grave of priest Stefan Laikish and his wife Olha Laikish from Ballybor, with the words from Grigory Skovoroda, "Everything passes but not God and not love." And the grave is in the form of the church that they left in their ancestral land in Subcarpathia. However, in 90s, Ukrainian Greek Catholic community in Ballybor was able to claim this place in northern Western Poland as theirs and to put their roots in this land by building a church with Professor Jerzy Nowosielski, prominent Polish architect of Lemko origin, and artist. He built the church for Ukrainian population of the town. And this is a modernist, beautiful church, which the first time community didn't like because it didn't remind them at all the old churches in Subcarpathia, which they had to abandon, being forcibly resettled. But then this church has become the center of their community life and the embodiment of their claim in this land as theirs, of their belonging for this land. They had to choose as home. They didn't choose it, but they had to live there. So they had to choose it through the history. This is the connection to the other side in Subcarpathia, actually. When I was meeting community members in the other places, first it was Tsiganek, the Żuławy region in the northern Poland, former Mennonites villages and former Mennonite churches, which now are Ukrainian Greek Catholic churches mostly. So what was, again, very powerful for me to observe that the people who were inhabiting this land and who were praying in these churches, Lutherans, Mennonites, they were gone. They had to go somewhere. They were resettled. And then the other resettlers came on their places. And they got houses and they got churches from those who were expelled. You know, the way how history meals people fates has become so palpable for me here in Poland when I was researching, and I am researching Ukrainian Greek Catholic community. From northwest of Poland, Ukrainians are coming to Subcarpathia to engage into the pilgrimage, the mountain of Zjavlinya. Zjavlinya means apparition in English. And this is the mountain where the chapels were ruined in the aftermath of the Second World War. But again, to claim continuity of sacredness in certain places, Greek Catholics rebuilt the church with the enormous efforts, not only from Ukrainians of Poland, but also Ukrainians from all over the world. I met Canadian Ukrainians and American Ukrainians in these pilgrimages. They all are from Poland, from Ukrainian Greek Catholic communities in Poland, and they all share the history of forcible resettlement of their family members after Second World War. And now they are contributing of revival of shrines, pilgrimages, and churches on their ancestral lands and coming into these nostalgic or roots pilgrimages to feel their belonging and to heal the history and their own story as well. This is photos from this former Mennonites and now Greek Catholic Church in Tsiganek. So Maria, the Queen of Heavens, still something left from Mennonites. And here you can see the Greek Catholic iconostas and icons on the rushniki, embroidered towels, and Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest praying here. So it's different continuity of sacredness, but it's definitely a chain of memory for me here. Religion is a chain of memory for me here. It's different denomination, but it's still in the same church. It's still the same Maria König in this human, watching other believers of other denomination, but in the same church. Walking along Polish-Ukrainian border, I discovered the pilgrimage route interrupted by the Second World War, which was coming from Przemysl to the mountain of Zjavlinya, and then to Kalwaria Podsławska, and then to the Ukrainian side of the border to Hubychi, nowadays in Lvivska Oblast. And I was able to go only through the Polish part of this route because here is the forest and the border now. It's impossible to go there. This pilgrimage route was interrupted by the Second World War for the existence of Polish-Soviet border. Now it's Polish-Ukrainian border. But to understand those people who recreate old pilgrimages, I took part in pilgrimages by myself. It was my research tool. And I was engaged in pilgrimages like 5 times by myself, and it allowed me to literally step into the shoes of pilgrims and understand the power of walking, the power of engaging with nature and sacred places in nature, and the power of regaining their ancestral sites. Why it is so important, and where is the source of curation, you know, the power of reclaiming something and finding this identity, all journey through history. So the other pilgrimage I took part in was Orthodox pilgrimage, and this was my last field site in Poland and the crossroads of 3 borders, Polish, Belarusian, and Ukrainian, Włodawa, not far from the concentration camp Sobibor here, and not far from the Orthodox monastery in Jableczna here. Again, the whole palimpsest of history, religion, and memory. Włodawa was shtetl before the Second World War, and nowadays it's almost completely Polish Roman Catholic with a little Orthodox minority, which is about 100 people. So the town talks about itself as a town of 3 cultures, which is Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and Jewish. And this is a huge festival in September, the Festival Trzech Kultur, Festival of 3 Cultures. And there are obviously Roman Catholic shrines which are functioning, one Orthodox shrine which is functioning. And there are synagogues, small and great, which is a museum these days. It's like, facing non-existent neighbors. What is interesting about these 3 cultures brand and festival, it is an attempt to draw attention to a little town on Polish-Belarusian border. It is an attempt to do something good for a local community and to show the rich history. But still, when you spend a lot of time there and talk to different people, there is always the dominance of the Polish Roman Catholic culture here, and kind of neglection of to others. And there is almost no memory about Greek Catholics on these terrains, which were quite strong till the mid of 19th century. And then Greek Catholic churches were eradicated by Russian Empire with the imposing of Orthodoxy. So this complexity is seen only in some Orthodox parishes when they remember their history, and that's it. I was walking through abandoned cemeteries in forests there, along those borders, Orthodox cemeteries and even 19th century Greek Catholic cemeteries, all in forest, And I was thinking not about the graves, but about the people who are lying there and their fates, and whether they have any offspring that would come here and remember or not, and whether this remembrance is important or not. So many old members of Orthodox community here and in rural area here, they kind of resist against any national identity imposed to them. They are Polish citizens, but they don't consider themselves Polish. They are just Orthodox, and this is so powerful. So when they were telling me that after Second World War they had to choose national identity, whether to belong to minority Ukrainian or Belarusian and to the Polish majority, and because of their faith, Orthodox, they were written or Ukrainian or Belarusian, and they wanted to be written only as Orthodox. It was their desire. And they got lost in all these state-imposing identities, choosing the religion and their religious identity as means of quiet resistance, just being faithful to their shrines, churches, and to Orthodoxy perceived. So like 3rd generation, born in 80s and 90s, they would identify themselves or with Ukrainians here, here, and here, or with Belarusians northern, or as Polish Orthodox. This is it. It's just, I'm speaking maybe too long, but it's too multi-layered and too complicated terrain to be short. But in the very end of everything of this fieldwork, and in the very end of finishing this book, I was thinking, what was the most important? What kind of what's the continuation of the flowness, the book river, where the river flows? And my response is to hope and to healing. So I just wanted to share with you a little piece that I translated into from Ukrainian into English here. Which I think I wrote the most important words that I wrote in my epilogue, which I called Cure from the Past, Ліки від минулого. Life is something much bigger than all our pain, hurt, grievances, and fears. It is even more than our irreparable losses and grief, which people inevitably face throughout their history. We reconcile ourselves to living with loss, to put our broken hearts back together again and again. And by living through the depths of grief, we heal and learn to feel joy and trust again. Life is bigger than all the historical injustice and all the horrors of the past, from which modern Joyce's hero, Leopold Bloom in Ulysses, would like to wake up. Sometimes only the death of someone close to us makes us appreciate every detail of every day of our human existence, every moment that can be enjoyed, and every new meeting and telling of someone's story that resonates inside us. Perhaps this is the meaning of everything we seek. There is life in everything. It is just is. We just have to be consciously alive. And all that a person can really leave behind is the imprint of the search for his love, his trace on the path towards the light. Perhaps this is our cure from the past. And I hope I finish my book with this open question: what is the cure from the past? So I continue my research, and now I'm in Poland for the next year. So I thank you for your attention. I thank you for this opportunity to speak here, and I will be very grateful for all your comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Julia, for a wonderful presentation. We all applaud you, your research, and certainly your book. I just wanted to say one of the just two of the most powerful takeaways for me personally after reading your book. I have to always say that for me, there was a nagging question: why are memory studies so important in Eastern Europe, and specifically in this part of the world, in Poland and in Ukraine? Memory studies really permeate cultural studies, historiography, and certainly historical understandings more broadly. And of course, one can always think of, or prior to reading your book, I had always thought about, the very traumatic history to which this part of the world was subjected. And so hence, sort of the healing aspect of it. I mean, recall that Tim Snyder referred to it as the bloodlands. And of course, I also was cognizant of the fact that both in the Soviet Union and even in Soviet-styled governments, say in Poland, that there was, of course, censorship of history. And so there was, of course, yearning for other kinds of interpretations of history. And that's pretty much how I had sort of explained to myself this nagging question as why are memories so important to so many people in this part of the world? Because I assure you, elsewhere in the world, it's not so important. And I think when I read your book, one of the biggest, you finally answered that question for me, that I think it's in remembering that one can begin to imagine the future. And in that way, then the past becomes sort of a means into the future. And therein lies the sort of the healing capacities of remembering. And therein lies the ability of remembering to generate hope. Oddly enough, one takes a detour through the past so as to imagine the future. And you were the first one who really explained to me in a way that was satisfactory, why memory is so important. And the other really important thing I learned by reading your book was a different perspective on religion, and in particular, lived religion and memory. Danielle Hervé-Léger, who you quote quite a bit in the book, of course, she looks at religion as a chain of memory, but the idea that forgetting is what yields secularization. And you, in fact, approach everything from the other way around by looking at this man who holds on to the keys, or going to abandoned cemeteries, or walking to these previous sites of one's ancestors. All of these are a way of reconstituting this chain of memory. And in doing so, that also keeps very vibrant a sense of lived religion. And as you very, very ably illustrate, sense of identity and really a sense of hope that stems from the empowerment that comes from holding on to the keys, from walking through nature, and a great many of the other discoveries that you point out about these, I think you call them not famous sites. And this is really a tremendous, tremendous contribution. And so I think you engage Hervé-Léger, but you engage her in another way that really brings memory studies into a whole new frontier and highlights the importance of to live religion on many fronts. So that was for me personally, two very significant contributions of this book. But being Yulia, you didn't stop with just that. I thought it was also tremendously interesting that you really begin to offer a methodological innovation. And I'd like this to be my first question to you. You distinguish between each chapter being a true story, and yet you write your book based on field notes and a travel diary. So two different kinds of recordings, if you will. And so I was wondering if you could help us understand the differences between these two sources, and how these sources might affect what an anthropologist writes. There's, of course, an established tradition of ethnography and one of autoethnography. And yet you write about anthropological reportage. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you came up with this term and how your emotional impressions, how they permeated perhaps your field notes and your travel diary in different ways that allowed you to offer this anthropological reportage.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you for your so insightful and deep comments. Thank you for reading my book so deeply. I feel very grateful. Because first I was overwhelmed and I didn't know, how to put together lived religion and memories and all these alive stories, and treating people's lives carefully. That was the main thing that I wanted to do. Answering your question, I have to say that I'm an adherent of thick description, what Geertz offered us. So I love when anthropologists do thick description of details of their field. So all the nuances of all the contexts they are surrounded and they're putting themselves in, because all is important, like everything is important. Silence is important, talking is important. I mean, colors are important, smells are important, sounds are important, everything. So when I was traveling from different parts of Poland and just in Poland, I was writing kind of field notes, even when I was not doing field work, but I was always noticing something that was important to me. The Ukrainian church in German church, why it is so. And I was just coming in and asking why and how and looking for some traces of the past. Why would Ukrainian community happen to be in northern Poland in the former Mennonites or German church? I was actually at the wedding there. So I was traveling for the wedding that I was invited to. And then I thought, well, this is the field too for me. So this were travel notes combined with my fieldwork. Fieldwork was, of course, longer. But I mean, again, I have a rule for myself that every evening, or at least every second evening, I'm sitting and writing in my diary, because otherwise I can forget something very important. And it's just a habit of, for years, habit of writing and just noting nuances, conversations, and sometimes I'm drawing too. So it helps me to memorize. And that was it. That was the big context from everywhere. And so when I was on Fulbright, I actually took to America all my notebooks of handwriting. So I was writing my book based on all these notes, travels and field work, and just recreating this context in me. That's it, I guess. Why I called it anthropological reportage, because I had this ambition, this book, to talk to people's hearts. I didn't want it to be dry and strictly academic. I wanted it to be reflective. I wanted it to be just like Vulnerable Observer by Ruth Bihar, when she's writing, I'm the woman of the border and between academia and creative writing, something like that. And she embeds her own Cuban, Jewish, Spanish ancestral story into her ethnography. It was one of the examples that just influenced me, I have to say, how to write. And I wish I could write this that way in English, but it's still not, I'm not there. But I think in Ukrainian I can write that way, so in one of my native languages. That's why reportage, because I included there are a few chapters that are not from fieldwork, like that one, Angel from the Polish Hill in Pittsburgh. That was also travel somehow to Poland too, because it was Little Poland in America in Pittsburgh. The Polish guy, no word in English, who was working in America and who was lost in this new world for him, this, again, border situation. It was a borderland for me too, especially regarding his story of his parents' resettlement after Second World War. That's it, I guess.
Well, thank you for that. By the way, I think you write beautifully in English too, just for the record. And one thing you've written very eloquently about is the importance of silence, that ethnographers need to pay attention to silence and what people might be saying with their silence. And I'm thinking of many, especially the work of Dori Laub and Shoshana Feldman, who write about World War II and specifically the Holocaust. And one of the things that they argue after interviewing many people who endured World War II was that the way to know that a person has been traumatized by their past is that they can't speak about it. They can't articulate what they've been through. In other words, they can't write in their journal every other night. But that then, it's not as if that silence then is very often generative. In other words, it's subsequent generations, as your research shows, that it's subsequent generations that sometimes feel even more obliged to articulate what they've been through, to read a person's face, to discover and maintain each of these sites. But in particular, I'm wondering if you could comment on memory and, in fact, post-memory studies, how those might be affected by silence. In other words, things people recall, but perhaps might recall in an emotional or in a visceral way, but not necessarily with words.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. It's a great question. Post-memory is vitally important category in this field, because I often encounter that emotions when people talk about the past, emotions of second generation and even third, are stronger than the emotions of people who experience trauma per se. So when grandchildren talk about their grandparents' experiences, they are more emotional sometimes, and they feel this more resentment, more offended by history, than the grandparents that somehow reconciled, or because of their age, or because of their life wisdom and life experience, or because of their very deep religiosity too, that gave them a sense of curation somehow through all these decades. I encountered silence many times too from people of different generations, but what kind of silence was it? It was the silence of words when people would refuse to be recorded or to talk about the past, but their behavior and the way how they would show me something was not silent. So the invitation, for example, to go together to the cemetery, and to observe something or to help to clean somebody's grave, I also perceived it as a form of communication, but something that doesn't rely on words. So they don't talk about the past, but they bring me to the grave, of the former Ukrainian insurgent army soldier, in Carpathian Mountains, and we clean it together. So it is very eloquent. It is important. Silence. Sometimes, yeah, there was a situation which I guess everywhere, when I had 4 hours interview with the woman that agreed to be interviewed. I think it was one of the best interviews in my life, in my ethnographic experience. And then her daughter gave her a phone call, and the daughter was intimidated by a stranger sitting at her mother's kitchen, and she asked her mother to give me a phone to talk. I talked to her, and I didn't convince the daughter that I am a scholar or I am doing research, and no references to my colleagues from Warsaw helped me at all. So the daughter asked me to go and to leave her mother alone, that she suffered enough and she won't tell me anything. And after that, the woman got frightened, like my interlocutor, and she asked me to delete this 4 hours interview. And what could I do? I just deleted it. What could I do? What would you do in this situation, right? You can't leave it if she asks you, just you're sitting here with your recorder and she asks you to just delete it. That was a form of silence for me too, affected by post-memory, because it was the daughter who got intimidated, So it is vital, yes. But also post-memory has some positive meaning too, not only silence, because second and third generation are the most active people who restore the shrines, who rebuild the churches, and who recreate pilgrimages. This is because of their initiative. And third generation, who are now in their 30s, they are the most active in all these processes, especially in pilgrimages.
So I wanted to ask one final question, if I could, and then we'll turn to questions that have already come in. And this final question has to do with time. As you know, there are a great many initiatives underway now to document the experiences of displacement and violence brought on by the invasion in 2022. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about what are perhaps the benefits and what are the pitfalls or the blind spots that might be produced as a result of documenting memories of certain experiences, not just months after they occur, but sometimes days after they occur. Because, of course, you're documenting experiences decades later. So I'm wondering what difference might you see in terms of time that has elapsed since these traumatic and violent events?
Yeah, such a challenging question. Huge. Thank you, Kathy. I don't research refugees now because I don't perceive myself as a refugee either, but certainly as someone who got displaced because of the war. And I think I have no distance at all for that. So I don't know how I would research refugees, to be honest, because 2 years ago I was in Warsaw as well, and I was volunteering as a translator in one shelter for Ukrainian refugees, and that was enough traumatic experience for me personally, just to encounter these women, to help them, to go with some of them to the doctors and to speak, Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, all that. Was the moment when I decided that I just won't be able to do ethnographic work with refugees, just because it's too painful for me. I can't, it's too fresh, and it's my own trauma too. So, there was one woman who was pregnant after occupation, and she couldn't do abortion in Poland. Nobody knew what to do, There was only German NGO, female, that somehow helped her. But the story that she told, like anonymously, of course, was horrifying. So I don't know how to gather these fresh ongoing testimonies of war. I know my colleagues are doing this in Ukraine, and I just, I have lots of respect for that, but I can't do it. So when I was doing this, something that happened 70 years ago, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, I can't say that it's easy. It's not. But there is a work of memory, and forgetting sometimes is healing too, or doing something to cure. For these local communities of Greek Catholics and Orthodox, religion has become a huge means of curation. And I mean not only something spiritual, but engagement in religion at the local level. Like, again, taking care of little shrines, of roadside crosses, of being engaged in pilgrimages, and taking care of church, and not forgetting actually that this is their religion that cemented their community. So that helped. And I know that some of these communities, they offer religion as a curation for many of Ukrainian refugees now. I just don't know whether it helps or not and how many people are engaged. But last year, when I was in pilgrimage in 2023 and near Przemysl, I saw many refugees there from many Ukrainian cities, not Greek Catholics, but just people from Ukraine, mostly women, some with children, who came just to see, to have the sense of Ukrainian community there and to experience some hope. So this is a power in that, but I think that when we work with long-term trauma is different than when we work with something that is ongoing. And certainly, like, not every researcher from this community can do this work.
So that actually relates to one of the questions. We have several questions in the chat, and I would like to turn to them. One asks, from Olena, why do you think religious traditions are preserved better than language in such families? I mean, is that perhaps what you were just speaking of there because of the healing capacities, or?
It's very powerful, especially church that was underground, Greek Catholic Church, it was banned. People were risking their lives and being persecuted when they were gathering secretly in rural houses or somewhere, just waiting for the priests to come and to have a mass and to have confession. It was something that was cementing them, was keeping them together. But in terms of language, it depends, because in Greek Catholic communities, language is preserved way more than in Orthodox communities. So Greek Catholic Church has always been the church that was attached to Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian language in that region. That Ukrainian is the language of sacred, the language of liturgy. So it has been somehow preserved. Of course, it's influenced by Polish, but it is preserved. In Orthodox communities, it's slightly different.
Thank you. Now, I want to try to combine two questions that both deal with borders. So one from Ivana and the other from Natalia. So could you say a few words about tensions that might exist on the borders and recently perhaps because of farmers or previous sources of tensions? And then speaking of borders, Natalia points out that borders don't just separate, but they also sometimes connect and produce multi-layered spaces that allow people to come together. So I was wondering if you could comment on the role of borders. To what extent do they separate people? To what extent do they bring people together?
It's a great question because Borderlands is a matter of interconnections too. Like to understand this, I was crossing Polish-Ukrainian border in few border checkpoints just to understand this and to see the smuggling trade. Even before the visa liberation regime with European Union, before 2017, it was way more complicated. But I think what I observed, I think that people in border communities live their very specific life, not only because of the existence of border and that they profit on this border existence because they trade and sell and they have all these small businesses around the border, both legal and illegal. But I mean, local farmers, like local Polish farmers, with whom I was speaking quite often in Podcarpathia, they were able to apply for European Union grants because they live in the periphery, they live in the kind of rural area near the border, and they don't get enough funding from the local sources, so they would apply for the European Union grants to develop. And that was an opportunity for them living in such a, let's say, so-called backward region to have something. Especially those who are younger and, you know, who have more opportunities in terms of knowing some other languages than their native one. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's such a huge question. I know that for me, sometimes it was complicated because I wasn't perceived as a scholar there. Being a young Ukrainian woman, I was perceived as somebody who was looking for a job of cleaner or babysitter, or, you know, somebody who was looking after elderly people or picking strawberries. One of the chapters is called Season for Raspberries. And I am describing how I was perceived as a raspberry picker, you know, and local people were trying to find me a husband among Polish farmers who were looking for Ukrainian wife who would cook and pick strawberries or whatever. So that was kind of, you know, quite a difficult experience to embrace. So that also was the border situation there. And many Polish people from local communities, they would go for work in Germany or England or Ireland or even the US. One of my respondents worked in local government, let's say, and his wife was working in Chicago for years and just sending money to Poland. And they were apart for years, but that was made for the sake of their children to get education in Western European countries. So, and this is the reality which is very familiar to Ukraine too, for the families apart and the children which were called so-called Eurosiroty, Euro orphans. Yeah, we share this term between Poland and Ukraine. Again, so whether it's both, so the border both divides and connects. It's just different levels and different dimensions of these divisions and connections and being in between. You know.
So we have lots more questions, but I'll try to take Maria's next. How do you balance the needs or your own desires for scholarly research with writing a book for a broader audience? And you mentioned this dilemma several times in your conversation, but which is more important for you personally, and how do you achieve that?
Great question. I wish we won't divide this writing, you know, there is a tradition of academic writing which is more emotional and reflective. Like emotion is the part of ethnography. And Sarah Ahmed writes about it a lot, Judith O'Kelly too. So emotion is a powerful ethnographic tool too. So I think it's a mistake to cut emotions from the ethnography. And, you know, this kind of Ukrainian academic tradition, post-Soviet academic tradition, I would say, to write, you know, in this strictly heavy academic style with historiography and, you know, it's something that I don't fully accept, because I think that writing should be alive, be it anthropology, be it history. When we do research in archives, it's also alive stories of alive people that had their own, you know, destinies and had, again, their own joy and bitterness in this life. So if we are able to write the way that we touch humanity in the other person, first humanity and then intellectual level, then I think it's a good writing. You know, when writing reminds us the museum of words, when we understand nothing, you know, through the very sophisticated and very dry language, I don't think it's you know, writing that can touch humanity in the other people, touch somebody's heart. So I am learning constantly to write that way, that I want my writing to touch somebody's heart, because I want people to draw attention to, you know, the territories that are a little bit forgotten, that are called peripheries, that are called backward. And you know, the same way that I know that Eastern Europe is very much marginalized in the bigger scale, you know, this division between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and economically, culturally, and all that. So I just wanted to show some difference. You know, one of my stories is about a mixed family of someone from England and someone from Poland living in a little village in Polish-Belarusian borderlands and having their little farm, you know, and the way how they embrace two countries, two different cultural traditions, and also different pasts of their families together. It's again something about hope. And writing creatively ethnography doesn't mean writing about theory or not grounded in theory. No, don't. I don't think that writing that lacks emotions is a good theoretical writing, actually. So I think that the best way is to combine theory and emotions and creativity. I'll just, I may say.
I think that's your style. That's what makes you distinctive. That's how you offer insight. And so I think this will have to be our last question. It's from Lilia. So she asked that you mentioned some of your respondents experience a certain kind of in-betweenness, like, for example, having two homelands. And she asked were there any other such instances of such self-perception that's either ambiguous or dual or, again, multi-layered, like the Borderlands themselves?
I would say it's rather palimpsest than ambiguity, because they don't see it as ambiguity. In their perspective, it's quite natural having two homelands, the place where you were born, Poland, and the place where you're so longing for, Ukraine, the spiritual motherland. They embrace these two traditions in themselves, and they don't feel torn apart. They have their own communities which are very strong. They have religion community here, which is a background of their upbringing. So it could be in between us, and it was when they were growing up and they're facing negative stereotypes in Poland about Ukrainians. But it's hard. They don't like to be called diaspora or minority, because they would always say that we are Ukrainians from Poland. We have been rooted here through our ancestry, but we are Ukrainians, you know. So one of my questions that I ask myself is the different, how can we frame minority that doesn't want to be called minority, you know, if they are very influential in cultural terms, even in political terms, whether they are minority only in numerical terms, you know. and their in-betweenness is natural for them. So
Yeah, I think that's a very insightful answer. And I think as someone who lives in an immigrant receiving country, I think probably Ukrainians here would say the same. So please, everyone, please join me in thanking Yulia for writing such a compelling and insightful book that really begins to push the frontiers, not just of ethnographic methods, but even theory, as well as offering the thick description of these tremendously fascinating communities in this borderland region. And I also offer my thanks to the Fulbright office once again for sponsoring this event. And lastly, to our wonderful audience who stayed all the way to the very end. Thank you very much for being with us.